think for me, the fact that people weren't sharing the same story was really beneficial for me, because there was part of me that really, in hearing it, in my own seeking a bigger understanding of that life force energy, I felt like each of those stories gave me another piece of that from someone else's perspective. When life throws a challenge at you, one thing is certain: to find a resolution for every issue, every problem, for everybody, there's more than one way. So we've been talking this summer about different spiritual experiences and have had people come and share with us about theirs. We've had some submitted in from listeners, which is great. And so we thought we'd take a little bit of time to kind of wrap that discussion up a little bit, and just to kind of share our own thoughts and questions and things that have popped up as we've listened to other people share just kind of their intimate experience with the sacred. So I'm glad we can take some time to do that.
Yes, it's very difficult to try to talk about experiences of things that aren't kind of normal day-to-day ways to be, ways to think, ways to experience. And one of the things that just constantly comes back to me with any kind of experience that's kind of outside of, or at least a little bit outside of the so-called norm, is how subjective they are. Yeah. Each person has his or her own experience, and then depending on how strong it is, spends however much as time they need to try to process and then articulate that experience. So for instance, using mine, one of the ones that I've had that I kind of return to quite a bit was when I was in a monastery, raining outside. I was in a very difficult external place, kind of struggling a bit. And inside there was a lot of churning as well. So I lit a candle and I was deep in prayer, and all of a sudden the room kind of lit up. It was as if the whole room was one big light. And I had this deep sense of, you are mine. Now you could say, was that a voice? I wouldn't necessarily say it was a voice, and this is part of the processing. As I process it, it was more just kind of an internal, comforting knowing, right? And you are mine. So nothing specific about that, more just about another way to see myself as, I guess what I would say is that there was something greater than my own individual ego consciousness that lives within me. And that's where it felt like that came from. And Christianity might call it the Holy Spirit or the Paraclete. Judaism calls something like that the Ruach. Hinduism, the Atman, the Great Spirit, the Buddha nature. All right, so
it bridges across the different traditions and
different religious traditions that try to get at that phenomenon. But like I'm saying, it was an internal, subjective phenomenon that I was experiencing. If somebody had walked into the room with me, they might not have had anywhere near the same experience. Right? So that's my take on all the stories we've heard, is we have to remember this is an individual's experience, and when it gets troublesome is when we try to then apply it, or we compare our experience to theirs, or they try to put their experience as this should be everybody's. Like that the whole born again thing.
Right.
Everybody's supposed to do this.
Right.
So that was my first takeaway. I'm sorry.
So it's organic for a person. I mean, they would, right, and that they would, like you said, when you said the knowing, I think all the stories that we've heard, each person has just clued in to that moment of they knew it was something different. It made a shift in them internally.
Yeah, exactly like that. And then the way that they go about describe it, I might personally connect to the way they describe it, or I might be like,
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure about that.
Right.
I need to ask more questions about that, or I need to, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's the thing about subjective experience, is it's subjective, and it's not, there's not like an external authority.
Mm.
Right. So way back in the day, way back in the day when Christianity was first forming, for the first 300 years, there was a wide variety of Christianities, is the way I would put it.
Okay.
A lot of small communities. And within those small communities, people would have different types of experiences and different ways to, and then there were stories told and then writings that came out of those experiences. But it was messy,
Right.
right? Because if somebody said, well, what does it mean to be Christian? There's no one answer, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Especially then, because it was. But so then the Emperor Constantine came into power, and once he came into power and became Christian, he wanted to make it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So he couldn't have all this subjective messiness that's going on.
Yeah. Needed to have some structure or some definition.
Yes.
More so. Yeah.
And it became known as orthodoxy, or
Right.
a right belief, or
Yeah.
this is the standard that everybody who's in power agrees on. And that's part of where, the
Shared
Bible.
understanding.
Yeah, shared understanding. Yeah. Which brings a lot of helpful things. Really,
absolutely.
it consolidates people. We're all on the same team. It probably helped Christianity to survive all the centuries, to have that consolidation. But the downside is when then that becomes the sole measurement for somebody's experience, for the sense of the presence of God. And throughout the Christian tradition, people have gotten into trouble.
For sharing an outside perspective of
something
that.
that's outside, And I've mentioned people before, people like Meister Eckhart come to mind, John of the Cross comes to mind, people who have different experiences from the authoritative, hey, this is the way it's supposed to work experience. Or this is the way God is, right? And see, once you bring God into the picture,
You said it.
Yeah.
right? Right? And that's the thing about these stories. Once God was brought into the picture, how many different definitions of God is there going to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another helpful thing with an authority, is they define God.
Okay.
And then your experience fits into their definition. But sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So, so in our day, back in the day, eventually in the Christian world, it became Trinity.
Okay.
So that would be the way to try to describe who and what God is. And there's a fun one if you guys want to hang out and chat about the Trinity. So
unpack that.
yeah, right. Yeah, and it is. It's a constant unpacking, and it has been. People have written about it for centuries, because it is in its heart of hearts a deep mystery. So that would be the official Christian thing. But then you have people who go to church or who consider themselves to be Christian. And in our day and age, I think you can find as many definitions for God as there are people who participate.
Probably so. Yeah.
And so if one person's talking about God, and another person's definition of the God the person's talking about is a supernatural being that lives far away, and periodically intervenes in life, and then we call those things miracles. And for the most part, that's about all that God does. Doesn't really do, And this person has a much more intimate way to talk about God. That person's going to sound borderline crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a fine line right there.
Yeah.
But if you have a different definition of God, which is one of the things I say before I preach, is apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Okay, that comes from Meister Eckhart, the guy I was telling you about, got in trouble. And that vision of God is not the separate being in the
Right.
sky. It's an internal force. It's an internal energy, kind of like what I was talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than God is appearing at this time and to special people,
Mm-hmm.
it's God is present all the time, and periodically we wake up and see it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would put into the light. Me sitting in the monastery
Mm-hmm.
room and the light shining.
Well,
It would be me becoming aware of an energy that's always there.
And thinking about that story and the communication of that statement or that revelation of "you are mine," did you question who said that, or where that was coming from, or did you just know? I mean, was it something
sure, I questioned it. Sure, it was like, did that just happen? What was
Mm-hmm.
that? And
Mm-hmm.
plus, almost even more than that, just the light,
Mm-hmm.
because it was so strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of it, I was like, what the heck's going on with me? This didn't just happen. That didn't just happen.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was some kind of a semi-dream or something like that. So all that stuff went through me.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I sat with it, the more the sense within myself was, no, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that so-called voice, which, like I said, is probably more of like an internal sense
Mm-hmm.
than an audible external
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
voice, right? That was there. And then I've spent a great deal of time trying to then unpack what that is. And that's why I come back to the definition of God.
Mm-hmm.
For me, God is really going to be that indwelling energy, that indwelling life force presence.
And
Much more than something external and apart from me.
And your experiences have led you to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And led me to people who have had similar experiences.
experiences.
So that's
Okay.
why I'm so attracted to the so-called mystics in every religion.
Mm-hmm. Because they're talking about that
Mhm.
in that language and
Yep.
those experiences.
Yep.
And,
Mhm.
okay.
Use the same kind of language, same kind of not identical experience, but same kind of language to try to describe the experience.
And I think even in listening to the stories that we've heard over the past several episodes, it's interesting to me that so many of those came on the edge of a challenging moment or a difficult time or something that someone was going through that was uncertain or unknown. And it seems like that for whatever reason in the stories we've heard, that was almost a doorway for that type of experience. Do you think that's true?
What do you think?
I mean, it rings true to me,
Yeah.
just that in those moments, maybe because of what we're going through, we're more attuned or more open, to the potential of that. And maybe we're hungry.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And thinking of when you said that experience that you had was in a monastery. So you went there seeking.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that we've heard, it does seem, so maybe there is a challenge, but oftentimes when you're in a challenge, you're seeking for a better answer, not a worldly answer, some answer that will,
And by worldly answer, you mean like a typical answer that's going to satisfy whatever the seeking is?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean.
And
As
maybe
opposed to-
that seeking is internal before we realize it's internal. Even if we've gone somewhere or we're doing something physically, maybe there's an internal piece of that that's already begun that we haven't realized just yet.
Yes, and for me it is. And so that, and it was, the internal part was that, for lack of a better word, suffering, struggle.
Yeah.
And this, I didn't know about monastery, but it was, like I said, I'm having these internal experiences, which leads me to these people in the tradition who've had similar ones, which leads me to places where they used to hang out. Right. So the place where I'm talking about with the light was where Thomas Merton went. And you guys know Thomas Merton?
No.
You guys out there know Thomas Merton?
Tell us more.
So Thomas Merton was a Catholic I think a Cistercian monk, a Benedictine Cistercian monk. And he really kind of in the 50s and then 60s in particular, really reintroduced the West to the contemplative world. And by contemplative, I mean the inner world, that inner sense of presence, that inner sense that everybody has, and the inner world we all live with, that is unique to each of us. So he really reintroduced that and reintroduced some of the mystics from the Catholic tradition that maybe weren't getting much attention. And he started writing books about it, and eventually became a pretty secluded, what some people call a hermit, there at the monastery in Kentucky called Gethsemane, and wrote a lot and corresponded with people throughout the world. And really and he had a very powerful experience once in the streets of Louisville, where once again he was walking down the street, and there was this big bright light that just kind of made everything golden, and he saw all these people walking, and his sense was how much he loved them all. And that was the experience, right? And he wrote about that. And that then shaped him as he continued on with the things that he continued to do. So he's a more up-to-date so-called mystic.
Gotcha.
And has written a bunch of stuff that corresponds some to what we're talking about. Tries to get at, and really tries to unpack a lot of the stuff that I'm trying to unpack, we're trying to unpack. Like, what do we mean when we say God?
Yeah.
Right? Because God is not the name of any particular being in my mind. God is the word we use to try to talk about a phenomenon, a concept, something bigger than us. And there's just been so many different ways people have tried to get at this. And we've heard in our own stories from here different ways people experience it. Personally, I think sometimes because there's such confusion when we use the term God, at least in my mind there's confusion, that we might try to use something else until we can, to describe the phenomenon, to describe the experience. So that's what I'm saying for me, there in that, light, to me, that's the power of what's going on inside projected outside.
Okay.
That's where I've come to, is what I was experiencing. And because I was struggling so much.
And you were seeking.
And definitely.
Yeah. Both.
Seeking relief, seeking some sense of presence, some sense that there's something greater than my own ego.
But you just described that as a projection from the inside.
Yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, versus being visited from the outside by something for you. Yeah.
I don't tend to go that way.
Yeah,
I have to admit, when people say that, I get a little spooked. Now, I'm not saying I'm right.
Yeah.
But I am saying
from your experience.
Yeah. And could once again say the same thing about voices. But the voices, it's a different energy. The way I've heard people talk about that, so for me the voices weren't they really weren't trying to get me to do anything.
And it brought peace.
Yeah, it brought
feels
a deeper
different.
sense of peace and a deeper sense of, and it wasn't really a voice. That's what I'm trying to say. It wasn't really like you read the Bible sometimes and they have these dialogues with like a prophet and God, or and the image could be, here's this guy standing there, and there's a booming voice coming out of the sky, and I just don't go there. I would say it would be way more of an internal sense, and then if you're writing about it, you might put it that way.
For the illustration, well, that was the question I was going to ask, I was going to ask a question about the Bible. So if that's your perspective, do you think that when you're reading certain passages that you read it in a different way? As opposed, if your sense of God is coming from the inside.
Yeah, well, so for me, I think the Bible is completely a subjective book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a devotional book for me. It's not even a book; it's a group of books, library books, and so So, I was talking about this today in our Bible study. In the letter to James, James talks about a way to read the Bible, and it's read the Bible as a mirror rather than a window. Mm-hmm. Now, he doesn't put the rather than a window. I added that. But reading the Bible as a mirror, and that's the way I've found the Bible to be the most helpful for me. And the way that I find it to be the most destructive is when people use it as a window to tell everybody else how they ought to live.
Sure, yeah.
So
that hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen it go well, or rarely, So for me, and there's a real internal pull to want to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing better than telling somebody else how they ought to be, right? Yeah. So when I'm reading Scripture, I'm reading it from that perspective anyway. Mm-hmm. That I'm looking at it as me in these stories in me, in some way. So, and all that comes back to these weird experiences that are hard to describe.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why most of us don't describe them, don't talk about them all that much.
Yeah.
Because they're weird.
They're weird.
Right.
And by weird, I mean, they're outside the norm.
Right.
Right.
They're outside our normal way of going about and functioning in the world.
Yes. And you're not sure when sharing those stories how they're going to be received.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's vulnerable.
It is. You're going to be very vulnerable. And once again, and then if you use typical language, so-called typical religious language, then you're just opening yourself up to all the different definitions that people carry with them when you use whatever it is.
And I think sometimes it can be frustrating to try to talk about it too, because sometimes it's so hard to describe. It's just, I can't make someone feel what I felt.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And so I'm just like, I just wish you were there. I wish you had felt what because I can't tell you.
Yeah. That's what I mean by
I can't tell you what it was.
That's a great description of what I mean by this is subjective experience.
Yeah.
I'm having this.
Yeah.
And maybe if you've had something similar, you can get on board. And I think that's why some things, like a deep premonition to give somebody a call, a lot of people can relate to that and have a sense of that. And some people might say, hey, that's a God thing. And then that opens up all that stuff we just talked about.
Right.
Or somebody might say, no, that was a deep intuition.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But for me, a deep intuition, for lack of a better way to put it, would be an internal God thing. And by God, I mean the life force energy that is bigger than my ego. Mm. That the Christian church can call the Holy Spirit, that the Hinduism calls the Atman, right? And how do you talk about this stuff?
Well, with trusted friends.
Yeah, right. People who have a sense of who you are, and right.
And I think that's such an interesting point, because we've talked about in previous episodes the value of having these conversations in community versus in isolation, or the damage of it's interesting when a community turns inward, it can get really dangerous. But when people turn inward in community, it opens. It can open things up. And so it's an interesting kind of paradox of to think that I'm going deeper, but there's value in me going deeper with other people.
Yes.
The purpose that once again, that I had from, I preached a sermon where I used the story of Meg, and that's kind of where, for me anyway, where it then led into some of the podcast stuff. And it was to trust those internal experiences, like trust yourself with this stuff. How else would I put it? If as long as you can keep it, this is a subjective experience. You're the authority, right? You can measure it by other things, and you can get help from other people, but it's still yours. in a sense. That's why my thing is just to say, okay, well, trust yourself. If you want to share it, share it. If you don't, that's okay too, but trust the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So having listened to all these stories where people have a connection with what we ended up calling spirit, what did that do for you? What did it do for you to hear it? What did it do for you to tell your own? Do you mind sharing that?
I'll go.
Okay.
In the original taping podcast that we had regarding this subject, I hadn't talked about my personal story in many years. But sharing it and hearing other people hear it, that I felt that I could trust, that I knew I could be vulnerable and it would land in a place. For me, it feels very grounding and connecting. And when I'm able to be with someone where they're able to share their inner voice, what they're thinking that they may not share with just anybody, it's a very connecting moment, and that's, for me, feels that I'm closer to a sacred place.
Cool. So that's one of the great benefits when you feel heard and accepted in a sense.
Sure. And it's not even that it has to be validated, that they are experiencing the same thing, but just to be able to say it out loud and not just be in my own head.
Gotcha.
I think for me, the fact that people weren't sharing the same story was really beneficial for me, because there was part of me that really, in hearing it, in my own seeking a bigger understanding of that life force energy, I felt like each of those stories gave me another piece of that from someone else's perspective, and in looking for, in feeling like I don't want my search to stop, or that I don't want it to be so limited or boxed in. It was helpful for me to hear other people describing it in their words and their experiences, with the idea of just thinking, oh, well, maybe that's the way I could experience it, or maybe I haven't been open in that way to that type of understanding. And so it was something that I found very challenging, just for my own search and openness.
So the benefit of hearing it, what I'm hearing you say, the benefit of hearing somebody else talk about it has an impact on your search.
Yeah.
I assume it does for you too, Thom, and all that you read.
Yeah. It's nice to have people who, I suppose you could say, like fellow travelers, as it were. Who and for me, the reason I like to read it is because I can see that this goes back a long, long time.
Yeah. And
people have been writing about and trying to describe these experiences since people could write, in many ways. And so for me, it opens up the kind of a religious sensibility toward life. That there's more going on than meets the eye, I guess you could say.
So for those of you that participated in a variety of different ways, whether you were with us on an episode or sent your story in or talked to us in between episodes about what you heard or what's going on in your life, we really thank you for being vulnerable with us and being willing to share your stories and your journeys with us as we kind of explored this. And so we hope that you'll continue to give us feedback and send in your thoughts. If there's something that's moved you specifically that you would love for us to explore or talk about, we're always open to that and would love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the More Than One Way podcast, brought to you by the Center for Spiritual Practice in Knoxville, Tennessee. We really appreciate your time and would love to hear your feedback. You can reach us by emailing hello@morethanonewaypod.com, or you can connect with us on social media using the handle @morethanonewaypod. If you found this episode helpful, we hope that you'll share it with your friends, with your family, with people you work with with all the people who you know. Thank you, and take care.